Kings and queens, it's finally Friday. We made it through another week. So, welcome to Math 7 Unit 1. We're going to jump into Lesson 6D for today. Once again, today is Friday, October 9th, and we're going to be working on page 15 of our spiral notebooks. So, our classroom norms, as usual, are that our cameras are to be on, our mics are muted, and then we are ready to chat and also learn. Our materials for today that you will need are your Math 7 spiral notebook, your pencil, and your student companion for Friday that can be found in Google Classroom. So we're going to continue talking about representing proportional relationships with graphs. We're now on day 4, and we're going to talk about 2 graphs for each proportional relationship. So our standards for today, once again, are 7.rp.a.2. Our objectives are students will coordinate tables, graphs, and equations that represent the same proportional relationship, interpret 2 different graphs that represent the same proportional relationship, but have reversed which quantity is represented on each axis. And then we're also going to write an equation to represent a proportional relationship given only one pair of values or 1 point on the graph. Our mathematical practices for today are MP3, which is construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, and MP7, looking for and making use of structure. As normal, we want to make sure that we're taking notes and working collaboratively. We'll pause the video here for 1 minute and 30 seconds so you can copy down the standard and the objectives. Okay, so let's jump right into our engagement activity for today. And you can also find this in your student companion. So as we are completing this, you should be completing your student companion that is in Google Classroom. You guys want to decide whether each equation is true or false. And I want you guys to be prepared to explain your reasoning. So let's look at the first one. We want to know if 3 halves times 16 is actually equal to the same value for 3 times 8. So I want you guys to take 1 minute and in your student companion, decide if this is going to be a true statement or a false statement. And then once you do that, I want you to also put your answer in the chat, and we'll have one person at random explain why they think this is either true or false. So we'll pause here so that you guys can answer number 1 in your student companion and also in the chat. Okay, so the answer to number 1 was in fact true. If I do 3 halves times 16, remember I multiply the numerators by each other. 3 times 16 is 48. And if I divide it by 2, that gives me 24. And on the other side of my equal sign, on the right side, 3 times 8 is 24. So both of those numbers equal each other. So therefore, it is true. Now, let's look at number 2. I have 3/4 divided by 1/2. And we want to know, is that equal to 6/4 divided by 1/4? So we'll pause for another minute. I want you guys to answer this in your student companion and also in the chat. And we'll have one student at random discuss why or why not this is true or false. Okay, so as we're checking our work, the answer to number 2 is in fact false. On the left-hand side, 3/4 divided by 1/2. Remember, when I'm dividing fractions, I have to multiply by the reciprocal. So this becomes 3/4 times 2/1, and that would give me 6/4. Now on the right-hand side, again, multiplying by the reciprocal, 6/4 times 4/1 gives me 24/4, which is just 6. So those two numbers are in fact not equal to each other, so it is false. Now let's look at the last problem, number 3, and in the chat and in your student companions, let's determine whether or not this is true or false. So you guys may have had to use a calculator for this last one, which is absolutely fine. But when you do the multiplication on both sides, you get 36.4 or 36 and 4/10, and that is the correct answer. So they both are in fact true. So let's make sure that we have that down in our student companion, and we will keep on moving. So let's look at our goals for today. The first goal that we want to be able to follow is that we want to be able to interpret a graph of a proportional relationship using the situation given. I also want to be able to write an equation representing a proportional relationship from a graph. So as usual, we will revisit these at the end of class to make sure that we've hit our learning targets for today. So our exploration activity, which can also be found in your student companion, actually the exploration activity we're going to do is together. Your elaboration is in your student companion. So your exploration is labeled tables, graphs, and equations. So using tables, equations, and graphs to analyze proportional relationships, we're going to look at a scenario. So let's look at this first slide here for our exploration activity. It says we're going to explore the graph and notice the values in the table and the coordinates of the labeled point. So if you look at my X and my Y columns in my table, I have a set of ordered pairs. And then if I look at the point that's labeled on the graph, I have 4, comma 2. So it says that we want to grab this point and move it around. Number 1 says, what stays the same and what changes in the table, in the equation, and on the graph? So you should still be able to see my screen. Once again, we want to know what stays the same we want to know what stays the same and what changes in the table and in the equation and on the graph. So if I take this point and move it around, what do we notice is happening? So once again, I'm starting at 4, comma 2, but let's look at what happens as I'm changing our points. What do we notice is happening on the graph? What's happening on the table? What's happening to my equation? So one thing that you may have noticed is that in the table, the values in column A stay the same, but the values in column B continue to change except for the 0. The equation is always y equals something x, so like the constant proportionality, but something is a fraction that changes, right? The graph always is a line. We did notice that, and it always goes through the origin. But as we talked about yesterday, we noticed that its steepness changed. Either it would get more steep or less steep. Okay. Now let's go back to our presentation. So now we're going to jump to our elaboration activity. Our elaboration activity, which is entitled Spicy Popcorn, can be found in your student companion. So we want to make sure that we're copying and capturing our answers to these questions in the student companion that was found in Google Classroom. So we're writing equations for proportional relationships. Let's read the prompt for this problem. It says Elena went to a store where you can scoop your own popcorn and buy as much as you want. She bought 10 ounces of spicy popcorn for $2.50. The first question says, how much does the popcorn cost per ounce? So that means that we want to find the constant of proportionality slash the unit rate. Number 2 says, how much popcorn can you buy per dollar? And then write 2 different equations that represent the situation. And we're going to use P for ounces of popcorn and C for the cost in dollars. So we'll take about 4 minutes here to pause so that you guys can capture your answers for numbers 1, 2, and 3. Now that you guys had some time to work on these problems, I would love for three different students, one for each question, to share out what their answer was, and then we'll come back together as a class to check our work. So at this time, we need three students. One person's going to answer number one, another will answer number two, and lastly, then the last person will answer number three, and then we'll come back to check our work. So let's pause here so that we can share out with the class. Thank you so much to those that shared. Now let's just double check our work. For number one, the answer for how much does the popcorn cost per ounce, it would be 0.25. And we got that because 2.25 divided by 10, remember we're finding our unit rate, is 0.25. So it would cost 25 cents because 2.25 divided by 10 ounces would be 0.25. So one more time, your answer was 25 cents because when I did $2.50 divided by 2 ounces, I got 0.25. Now, number two says, how much popcorn can you buy per dollar? So the answer to number two was 4 ounces because if you do the reverse and do 10 divided by $2.50 so that we can figure out what it is for each, it would be 4. So that would be 4 ounces. So the answer for number one was 0.25 or 25 cents. Number two was 4 ounces. And remember, for number three, we were trying to find equations. Some of you guys may have wrote them in the form y equals kx, but here it asks us to use specific variables. So the first equation was c equals 0.25p, and P equals 4C. Both of them being our different unit rates that we use. The first one will be C, which was the cost, equals 25 cents times P for popcorn, or P, which is popcorn, equals 4 for the number of ounces times C for the cost. So the next part of your elaboration activity, let's keep reading. It says choose one of your equations and sketch its graph and be sure to label the axes. So once again, you guys could have used either equation, and you can take this time to write them down now. C equals 0.25p, or P equals 4C. And we're going to give you guys 2 minutes to graph this in your student companion. So once again, you are only asked to create one of these graphs. It's not necessary that you guys plot and label a whole bunch of points, but it might be helpful in creating a reasonably accurate graph. Also, you want to make sure that you label the x-axis and the y-axis. For instance, the x-axis is the number of pounds, and then the y-axis is the cost in dollars. So for that, you will remember that you're using the equation C equals 0.25p. The constant proportionality would be 0.25, right? Because that represents how much it costs in ounces for 1 pound or 1 ounce. Also, the x-axis is, or you could use the alternate equation and label the x-axis the cost, and the y-axis would be the number of ounces. And in that equation, you'll be using P equals 4C. So this might be a little bit difficult, but I want to see how well you guys can come up with this graph, and I will be giving each individual student feedback in their student companions when you submit. So once again, we'll pause here. We'll take about 4 minutes for you guys to figure out the graph for this problem. So here's our vocabulary word wall. We've been comparing different lines of proportional relationships. Remember, one thing that we did talk about yesterday and also today is that a graph of a line through the origin represents a proportional relationship. Okay, remember that is important. We've also been talking about our equation for some time, y equals kx. And remember, k is our constant of proportionality. We can find that by taking our second column of our graph and dividing it by the first column. So let's revisit what our goals were for today. Remember, we wanted to be able to interpret a graph of a proportional relationship using the situation given, and we also wanted to write an equation representing a proportional relationship from a graph. Now I'm going to backtrack because I wanted us to be able to go back and look at this problem. So I wanted us to have a quick discussion about what is presented here. So our lesson synthesis, we want to know, do the graphs and equations tell the same story? If I look at these two equations, because this first one was for the first equation that I had, and then the second graph is for the second equation from our elaboration activity for spicy popcorn. And we also want to know, how can you see the same information in both? So I'm going to ask that we pause here just for a brief discussion about these two questions. Okay. So again, I wanted us to have a discussion, not necessarily find an answer, but I did want us to have a rich discussion around these two topics. So again, we've already gone over our goals for today. Now, I want us to do our last part, which is our evaluation activity, which also can be found in your student companion. It says, this graph shows a relationship between the pounds of cheese P bought at a deli and the total cost in $C for the cheese. So P is for pounds, C is for the cost. Okay. It says select each statement about the graph that is true, and we want to select all of the ones that apply. So for our evaluation for today, I want you guys to go ahead and in your student companion, choose which ones you think are the correct choices for this. And this is going to be where we grade for today as well. And then we will also give you the answer when we come back together next week. So we can pause the video here so that you have 2 minutes to answer the evaluation activity. All right. So it's officially time for the weekend. Well, until you finish all of your classes, but it is the end of the week. So we were able to go over all the different things that were necessary for this week. So our directions for our independent assignments. It's been an extremely heavy week. So today you have a little bit of a break, a slight break. So if you have any missing assignments from week 6, that is this week, during your independent asynchronous class time, you have the opportunity to submit any of those assignments by the end of the day. If they are not submitted by the end of the day, of course, it will be a 0. However, we will take off points for them being late. So it is important that we're submitting all of our assignments on time. And we also don't want to make this a habit. But for this week, because there was a lot of material, if you have any missing assignments from this week, you now have the opportunity to submit them today. If you have done everything this week, then you are on top of your game and you are on the ball. So the only thing that you need to do is begin preparing for your assessment next week. Next week, we will do a review activity to get us ready for our assessment and also troubleshoot and answer any remaining questions that you guys may have. As usual, we want to make sure that you guys stay safe. We are in a pandemic, and we will definitely see you guys next week. Remember, there is no class on Monday because Monday is parent teacher conferences and it is also a holiday. So we will see you once again on Tuesday for another lesson. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.